2020 Yahoo Finance Democratic National Convention Special. The Democratic Party comes together this week to formally nominate Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the next president and vice president of the United States.
The choice we make this November is going to decide the future of America for a very, very long time.
It's a time unlike anything we've seen before. A global pandemic, a deep worldwide recession, and a host of urgent issues at home. What is the message for voters? Tonight, we'll examine the platform, the policies, and the priorities.
We need a mandate that proves that the past few years do not represent who we are.
A Democrat win won't come easy in November, as President Trump has proven time and again he's a formidable foe.
I stand before you today to declare the silent majority is stronger than ever before.
Join us now as we present the 2020 Yahoo Finance Democratic National Convention Special. Welcome to Yahoo Finance's special coverage of the 2020 Democratic National Convention. I'm Andy Serwer. Joining me for the hour is Yahoo Finance's Jessica Smith, Kristen Myers, and Rick Newman. Tonight's show is the first of a two-part series. Next Monday, we'll be covering the Republican National Convention. But tonight, we dive into the Democratic Party platform and its presumptive nominee, Vice President Joe Biden.
America already knows Joe Biden well, largely because of his most famous friendship.
This also gives the internet one last chance to talk about our bromance.
Biden spent 8 years as vice president and 36 years in the United States Senate. His long history in Washington could be both an asset.
Choosing Joe to be my vice president was one of the best decisions I ever made.
And a liability. He presided over the Anita Hill hearing.
Can you tell the committee what was the most embarrassing of all the incidences that you have alleged?
He helped write the controversial 1994 crime bill.
And Madam President, we have predators on our streets.
He voted to authorize the war in Iraq, and he's faced accusations of inappropriate behavior with women.
I hear what they're saying. I understand it. And I'll be much more mindful. That's my responsibility.
Biden argues his decades of experience make him uniquely qualified to lead a nation in turmoil.
You know what it's like, as much as anybody, to be in the White House during a crisis.
As VP, he helped get the Affordable Care Act over the finish line, and now he wants to expand access to health care by building on it. He's a moderate Democrat who says he'll raise taxes on corporations, invest in education, and boost American manufacturing. Biden touts his relationship with world leaders and argues he'll need to rebuild America's standing abroad. Biden entered the race last year, calling this election a battle for the soul of America.
We got to beat Donald Trump, and we will, but we can't become like him.
This isn't the first time Biden has run for president. He tried in 1988 and again 20 years later. He considered it in 2016 but opted out as he grieved the loss of his son Beau. His late son, at least in part, led him to his now running mate, U.S. Senator Kamala Harris.
I know how much Beau respected Kamala and her work, and that mattered a lot to me, to be honest with you, as I made this decision.
Biden vowed to pick a woman as his number two, and his choice made history. Harris, the daughter of immigrants, is the first black woman and first Asian American to appear on a major party's presidential ticket. Biden has not thrilled the next generation of progressives, but with less than 3 months to go, Biden is pitching himself to voters as an experienced and steady leader who can guide the country out of crisis.
Joining us now is the president of the Center for American Progress, Neera Tanden. Tanden was the director of domestic policy for the Obama-Biden presidential campaign and a policy director for Hillary Clinton's first presidential campaign, where she directed all policy work and oversaw the debate preparation process. Welcome, Neera.
I also worked on the debate for Joe Biden against Sarah Palin, which, may come in handy soon.
Absolutely. We'll see about that. So, Neera, I want to ask you about Kamala Harris. And you've written evocatively about her, also being the daughter of Indian immigrants. But I want to know what you think she brings to the ticket. Does she bring in diverse voters or progressives or those housewives that President Trump talks about?
Well, Kamala's strength is with women and a broad diversity of women and people of color. So, I mean, we've seen this in the polling over the last few days. Strong majorities of Democrats support her, which I guess is not much of a surprise, but independents are very enthusiastic about the pick in this election. You see in the support for her that she has a broad diversity of support, Latinos, which is, it's interesting. I think it might be her immigrant experience, which is driving Latino support to the ticket, but also, of course, African Americans and women of all backgrounds, women in the suburbs, white women, women of color, Black women, Latina women, Latinas. So I think she's an exciting pick. It's obviously a historic pick. And I also think her experience as the daughter of immigrants is, almost a unique antidote to the kind of divisiveness we've seen with President Trump, who's attacked immigrants and has tried to change our immigration policies radically. I think it's an interesting contrast with Donald Trump himself as well as his policies.
Hi, Neera. Jessica Smith here. I wanted to ask about Senator Sanders giving his speech tonight. What do you expect to hear from him? Because it seems like he has to do a little bit of a balancing act between encouraging his supporters to support the Biden-Harris ticket and also use his time in the spotlight to advance his progressive agenda.
Well, I think you'll see that those two go hand in hand. First of all, Senator Sanders has done a really terrific job over the last several months unifying the party, which you can see in the fact that 95% of Democrats support the Biden-Harris ticket. And you can also see 88 to 90% of Sanders voters planning to vote for Joe Biden, which is higher than it was 4 years ago. So I really take my hat off to him. But I think he will make the case. I mean, I would imagine he'll make the case of why these two issues aren't in conflict, why we need to defeat Donald Trump by electing Joe Biden, but also to push a progressive agenda, you first need to make sure Donald Trump is not in the White House. And on issues like climate, on childcare, and other issues, there's been a kind of synergy, and you see Joe Biden leading on those issues that I think he isn't taking Sanders' agenda, but he's definitely been influenced by the agenda.
Hey, Neera, Rick Newman here. Joe Biden has a pretty good lead right now. It's about 8 points on average nationwide. Once he actually is the formal nominee, does he need to get out in the country and start campaigning in the swing states, at least getting local media and things like that, even if there can't be large crowds? Or do you think he can continue to campaign largely from Wilmington, Delaware, with just the occasional day trip over to Philadelphia?
Well, the campaign is infused. The entire electorate is focused on the coronavirus. And I think there are a lot of naysayers a few months ago who said Biden would lose if he didn't get out. But I think he's demonstrated leadership by listening to experts who've said that we need to do the real work of social distancing. So I think the idea that he would ignore public health and go campaign, that would have been a detriment to him. And I think he has a real deep advantage against Donald Trump on handling the coronavirus. And I think part of that is acting responsibly yourself. Vice President Biden acted responsibly last week. He wears a mask where appropriate. That's the kind of behavior we haven't seen at all from Donald Trump. And I think it's really hurting him with a broad swath of the electorate.
Hey, Neera,
right,
it's Kristen here. So, sorry, go ahead, Andy.
Well, go ahead. I think we might have time for a quick question then, Kristen.
Oh, sorry about that. Neera, I was just wondering, Rick just mentioned essentially how Biden right now is leading in the polls, but except on one issue, which is the economy. Trump right now is still leading by around 10 points when it comes to matters around the economy. And in this era of the coronavirus pandemic, the economy is a top issue for most voters. What do you think that voters are going to want to hear from both Democrats and Republicans from the vice president, the former vice president, in the next couple of days on the economy to essentially get them to be a little bit more enthusiastic about a Biden-Harris ticket?
Well, I think there are different polls. There's some polls where they're running neck and neck on the economy, but it's definitely an important piece of work to do. I think over the last 2 months, you've seen Joe Biden outline his plans to get this economy moving. We have a demand problem in the economy right now because of the coronavirus, and we really need to surge demand. The first step is to get the virus contained. That means having a national plan, which includes a mask mandate and several other steps, contact tracing, testing. All of those steps are important to fight the virus. But then he has an agenda based on investing in jobs where we need them. And that includes increasing domestic production of several items, including PPE and other things. And so I think he has a robust jobs agenda that was also responsive. But I think this week will be very important to that. I think this is a real opportunity for a lot of speakers to describe why Joe Biden, why a Biden-Harris administration will actually improve the country and improve the economy and keep people's public health safe.
All right, Neera Tanden, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Straight ahead on Yahoo Finance's DNC 2020 election special, our panel breaks down the top issues among voters as we head toward November. That's next.
Welcome back. As Joe Biden and Kamala Harris gear up to win the hearts and minds of American voters, we asked our audience what key issues they'd like to see addressed both at this week's convention and beyond. Here's what one person had to say.
Hi, my name is Leanne and I work in the fitness industry. My number one issue for this election is the federal government's response to the COVID pandemic.
Okay, joining us now is HuffPost Washington Bureau Chief Amanda Turkle. Amanda, welcome to the program. What do you think about that particular issue, and how is Joe Biden going to potentially address that in a different way from President Trump?
Sorry, I missed that first part of the speaker. Could you just repeat what she said?
Well, I think that she was concerned about the pandemic and the response to the pandemic so far. And I'm just curious what you think about Biden and how he is responding or would respond to it differently.
Sure. I mean, you couldn't respond to it more differently when you compare what Biden wants to do with what President Trump wants to do. And that's what Biden is trying to do, not only in sort of his policies and what he's doing. For example, he's called for a national mask mandate, whereas obviously Trump for a long time didn't even want to wear a mask and recently has started to, but has sort of toyed with whether he thinks it's actually a good idea and what needs to be done. But as you heard Neera Tanden when you were talking to her earlier, Biden is also trying to sort of demonstrate what he would do. He's not going to Wisconsin for the Democratic convention, something that Republicans are hitting him for. And he is largely staying in his house and staying away from people rather than trying to hold rallies or go to events. You see that the coronavirus pandemic obviously is a huge issue on the minds of voters ahead of the 2020 election, and I don't expect that to go away. Democrats say that it is more important to them in polling. The economy is #1 for Republicans and #1 overall. The coronavirus pandemic is important, but you do see Democrats saying that they care more about it more and more. The economy and coronavirus obviously go hand in hand, but Biden is really betting that enough people will be unhappy with Trump and how he's handled it, and that will help him win the election in November.
Hey, Amanda, Rick Newman here. Do you think Biden risks playing it too safe? In other words, we're getting signals that he's not going to do a lot of campaigning on the road. He's mostly going to try to talk to people. What is happening? I'm just going to continue with the question, Amanda.
Go ahead, Rick.
So my question.
Okay. Well, we're hearing someone talking about healthcare here, and I'm not sure whether it's going out over the air or not. But Rick, what were you? Why don't we pick up where you just left off, Rick?
Sorry about this, everybody. So, Amanda, my question is Joe Biden risking playing it too safe and being too complacent, thinking that he can just communicate with people from his home in Delaware, or do you think that could work all the way through Election Day?
Well, I think the question is, what else would he do? You don't have people congregating in a lot of places. So I don't really anticipate Joe Biden holding a big rally. That just doesn't seem feasible right now. And I think that Biden's base, the Democratic Party, wouldn't really like it if he did that either. Right now, the Biden campaign is not going door to door, knocking and canvassing like they traditionally would. The Trump campaign says it is, and they're using that as a key point of contrast with what Biden is doing. So, yes, I think that what you say is true. There are people who say that Biden needs to be doing more. He's in a bunker, he's out of touch. But, you do see Biden doing interviews. And when Biden has been there, sort of playing it safer, his poll numbers have been doing quite well. Whereas when you have President Trump out there exposed every day, doing the press briefings, making comments, that hasn't been helping him, and it has been giving some of his allies headaches, because he's been saying things that maybe they don't agree with, that aren't scientific, putting out new cures that aren't really cures. And so right now, this play it safe policy is working. Like you said, we'll see if it continues to work through November.
Amanda, it's Kristen here. How much of this race do you see right now as really Trump versus the coronavirus? I mean, we've seen a lot of people be incredibly critical on the president and his response.
I think a lot of it is. This election in a lot of ways was always going to be, do you want Donald Trump to get a second term or not? A lot of, it seemed that Biden, while he does have people who are very enthusiastic about him, a lot of people Democrats really saw him as the safest pick, the one who was most likely to be able to beat Donald Trump, even if, say, they agreed with Elizabeth Warren or Pete Buttigieg or Bernie Sanders on policies more. They saw Biden as the one who was able to do it. And so really what the coronavirus has done is just exacerbated that even more. Do you like Trump? And do you see what he's doing on the coronavirus as good or bad? I think what Biden is hoping is that, all those people who don't like Trump are going to stick with him, but maybe some voters who are on the fence will say what Trump is doing is bad and go over to Biden, and that will sort of be a swinging factor.
All right, Amanda Turkle, HuffPost Washington Bureau Chief, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up next on Yahoo Finance's DNC 2020 election special, former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe weighs in as we discuss the addition of Kamala Harris on the Democratic ticket. Stay with us.
To Yahoo Finance's special coverage of the Democratic National Convention. Joining me now is Terry McAuliffe, the former governor of Virginia and a longtime Democratic strategist and fundraiser. Terry McAuliffe, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.
What does Joe Biden have to accomplish at this week's convention?
Listen, for him to come out of this convention, I think people are yearning for leadership. They want answers. They're terrified of the COVID crisis, rightfully so. Millions of people have lost their job. I think at the end of Thursday night, shows strong leadership, plans of how to build the post-COVID economy. How do we keep us safe as Americans? I mean, just reassurance. He did it on the convention. I give Joe Biden a lot of credit. He made a decision early. No, we're not going to Milwaukee. Nope, I'm not going. And then Trump screws around with it, is in North Carolina, then goes to Florida, then cancels. You know, showed leadership. But it's a great ticket. Kamala Harris has added a lot of excitement. She's smart. She's tough. They just got to reassure Americans that we're going to move in a new direction.
What do you expect the outcome of the conventions to be this year? I mean, usually the candidate gets the so-called convention bump, maybe 3, 4, 5 percentage point gain in the polls. But we're going to have no arenas, no balloons are dropping. Yep. Should we have limited expectations this time around?
So on the one hand, yes, it'll be different. I've actually chaired 2 national conventions. I've been doing this a long time. This would have been my 12th convention. But on the other hand, with the COVID crisis, I think you're going to get a lot more eyeballs are going to be watching the speech on Wednesday and Thursday night. You look at the data, people are spending a lot more time watching, answering their phones, having political discussions. So I think there's a huge opportunity for us to lay that message out on Wednesday and Thursday and Monday and Tuesday as well. People are paying attention, Rick, because of the COVID crisis. So, 99% of the people are watching on television one way or the other. Yes, there's excitement with the speakers, the balloons, and everything around that, but it's a different time. It's a serious time with COVID, and people want serious answers. And that's why I think huge potential of people watching on Thursday night when Joe Biden delivers that speech.
Joe Biden has mostly been campaigning from his home in Delaware with occasional day trips across the border into eastern Pennsylvania. Does he need to get out now that we're hitting the home stretch of the campaign?
Yeah, it depends on the situation, the health, and the science. I think he should be doing exactly what he should be doing. First and foremost, stay safe. And, that's the message that he wants to convey to the American public. He came out the other day and said when he and Kamala Harris, their first time together, that every governor ought to mandate masks. So I think the message that he's staying safe, he can obviously communicate, which he does every day through social media. He does a lot of local television. That's what he should be doing. If it's safe to come out and do events, absolutely. But if it isn't, he shouldn't and he won't.
Well, can you see his campaign proceeding in a way in which he does not make trips to, let's say, the important swing states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and he just relies on getting his message out from Delaware?
It could be. We don't know the answer to that at the time where the coronavirus is increasing all over the country. I mean, when he travels, when the presidential candidate nominee travels, there's a lot of pieces and a lot of people involved in that. So you're asking people to put their lives at risk to come out for a political event when you clearly can do it by getting in front. And as we've all done with Zoom and Skype and everything else that we have, it's about communicating to people. And if it's not safe, he shouldn't do it. As I say, he will not do it. And that is the message. If everybody early on, if Donald Trump in November and December and early January, when he got the intelligence briefing, had taken coronavirus seriously, thousands of people would be alive today. He did not do it. Joe Biden from day one has relied on the science and has done things to keep us safe.
Just want to ask you about Biden's business agenda, such as it is. Our audience at Yahoo Finance cares a lot about his plan to raise the corporate income tax from 21% to 28%, raise the capital gain tax, some other things like that. You're a business person. Should business operators be concerned about that?
No, I think we got to go with the premise, first of all, that we today have a $27 trillion debt today, could hit $30 trillion by the time that Trump leaves office. So we've got to focus on the debt of this nation, because I'm not going to pay it, but my 5 kids certainly are. We've got to pay attention to it. But listen, we need a strong economy. As bad as COVID has been, and it's been just tragic, it is an opportunity for Joe Biden to come in and rebuild the American economy. Rick, it has not worked for the last 50 years for so many millions of Americans who did not take part in the upsurge in our economy. We can rebuild that economy that makes it all inclusive. So yeah, people are going to have to pay more taxes. People are fine with that as long as they know the government is very wise about spending and taking and protecting taxpayer dollars. But we got to get this debt down. We got to get the economy going again, and it's got to include everyone. So this is a shared economy that we have going forward. Business should be happy that Joe Biden is coming in. I think one of the first things he will do, I have spoken to the vice president many times on this topic, infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. We've got to rebuild America.
Terry McAuliffe, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rick. Great to be with you.
It's been tradition since 1831. Every 4 years, Republicans and Democrats gather to don funny hats, wave their signs, and send a message to the country.
We're unified, we're ready, let's go to the fall campaign.
In a normal election year, thousands of delegates would travel to their party's convention to vote on procedural rules, adopt a party platform, and officially name the presidential and vice presidential nominees.
These are party decisions, not public decisions, even though it feels like a public decision because there's so many primaries.
The delegates are usually people heavily involved in state politics, and they're assigned to candidates based on the results of primaries and caucuses, which take place throughout the election cycle. When a candidate wins the delegates in a state, they're expected to vote for that candidate at the convention. For example, in Michigan, Vice President Joe Biden won 73 delegates, and Senator Bernie Sanders won 52. To secure the nomination, a candidate must win the majority of delegates. This year, President Trump is essentially a shoo-in, but the Democratic candidate will need a total of 1,991 delegates to win the nomination. If no one reaches 1,991 on the first vote at the convention, there would be a second vote. In between votes, campaigns would wheel and deal on the convention floor, trying to convince delegates to support their candidate.
that would be real drama. That would be drama in real time.
But we haven't seen that kind of drama recently. There hasn't been a real nomination fight on the convention floor in decades. These days, by the time the conventions roll around, we already know the nominees. Joe Biden hit the magic delegate number back in June, but the vote at the convention makes it official.
They usually make a big show about it and who goes, which state puts the candidate over the top, etc. So usually what'll happen is by Monday night, Tuesday night, all the business of the convention is done, and they proceed to have as good a TV show as they can have.
Part of that TV show typically includes acceptance speeches by the nominees in front of massive crowds. But this year, the COVID-19 pandemic wrecked both parties' plans. The mostly virtual 2020 conventions will be like nothing we've ever seen before, and experts say that might be the case in 2024 as well.
For a number of years, people have said that these conventions needed change. The coronavirus pandemic is forcing the parties to rethink what had become something of a staid tradition. And I think we will see in future years a different looking national party convention.
On Yahoo Finance's 2020 Democratic National Convention special, we speak to Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer ahead of her big speech at the DNC.
I'm here with Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Governor Whitmer, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Happy to be with you.
So you're going to give a speech opening the Democratic Convention. What do you hope to get across?
Well, it's, these speeches are often very short, which is fine with me. I rarely give a long speech, but I think there's a lot to accomplish here. I certainly want to convey my enthusiasm and support for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I am excited about this ticket. I want to bring people together, and I want to focus on those who have sacrificed their own health to take care of others. And so those will be the main points that I'm trying to convey in that short period of time.
A little bit behind the scenes stuff for us, if I could ask you that. What's it like giving a speech at a non-convention convention? How do you prepare? What are you doing differently because it's not a live speech before thousands of people?
Well, I think it all comes down to making sure that it's a well-written speech that I can deliver, whether there's a live audience or not. I want to be able to communicate to people and to be direct. So I think that there are a lot of hurdles we're all trying to navigate here and in the era of COVID-19, but I'm really proud that our convention has been determined to be virtual so that we can be safe and so that we can show the American people life continues on. If we can stay smart, stay safe, and do what we need to do. And that's what's, I think, really important about this particular convention this year.
Governor, you mentioned the ticket. What does Kamala Harris bring to the leadership of the Democratic Party? And are you excited that she is Vice President Biden's vice president she'll pick?
I am excited. I think that Kamala Harris is the kind of forward-thinking leader that Joe Biden needs by his side. Having been in a position where I picked my running mate, it's nowhere near the scale of president, vice president, but my lieutenant governor is someone that, everyone in the world had opinions about who it should be. But at the end of the day, it came down to, me having confidence that he was going to be competent and share my values and share my vision for where we wanted to take Michigan. And the fact that Joe Biden has that and Kamala Harris, I think, is exciting. I think she, in her own right, is a phenomenal leader. And I really am excited about this ticket. My kids are excited about this ticket. And so I think that this is a moment for America to come together and to forge a new path, one that is focused on people's health and strengthening our economy, because they go hand in hand.
The Republicans, of course, won Michigan in 2016, surprising many. What will it take for the Democrats to retake the state, and are you confident that's going to happen?
I am. I feel good, but I don't think anyone should take Michigan for granted. I know that there are polls that have been out there that have it at a double-digit lead. I don't buy it for a second, to be honest. Michigan is a state that we all know the road to the White House goes through the state of Michigan. In 2018, I won by almost 10 points. We had historic turnout. It was a really phenomenal thing. In 2016, contrarily, it was a very depressed turnout. My biggest concern right now is making sure that every vote gets counted. We have seen there's an enthusiasm that is real and that I think is we'll see overwhelmingly for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But at the end of the day, this Trump administration hurdles around U.S. Postal Service, already taking efforts to call into question the efficacy of a future election, I think are precisely why none of us can take this for granted, especially in the state of Michigan.
Yeah, are you concerned about voter suppression?
I am concerned about it. I am concerned that people will get wrong information. I am concerned about interference from foreign nations. I am concerned about making it more difficult, current Trump administration making it more difficult for people to cast their ballot from the safety of their home. We are still in the midst of a global pandemic. We in Michigan amended our Constitution in 2018 to make it easier for people to vote at home. But if the USPS is not reliable or is being undermined, that constitutional right we have afforded people is undermined. And that's precisely why I'm working with our Attorney General and our Secretary of State to push back so that we can protect this right that we've enshrined in our Constitution.
Governor, you've locked horns with President Trump or been in his crosshairs, I guess specifically about opening and reopening the state. How is the reopening going right now?
Michigan's in a stronger position than a lot of states, and I think it's because we followed the science. We didn't get bullied. We didn't get, drawn into political arguments. This is a public health crisis, and we need to follow the best science and epidemiology, listen to our experts, and make decisions. None of this is easy. We have all made incredible sacrifice, and we've lost over 6,000 people in the state of Michigan. And yet we know right now we've really pushed that curve down, and studies have shown our work has saved thousands of lives. But this can crop up fast, and that's precisely why, as we are in this fourth, fifth stage of our re-engagement, it's all very precarious, and that's why masking up is so important. That's why continuing to socially distance and wash our hands is critical to our long-term economic health, but most importantly, our personal health.
And finally, Governor, I want to get back to the ticket in the election itself. Are you concerned about some of the comments that President Trump has made about Kamala Harris and maybe just the general nature of the campaign and the tone going forward?
Well, campaigns are always tough. And when the opponent is someone who's as unscrupulous, I think, as the Trump campaigns have shown to be, you got to be tough. But Kamala Harris is tough. And this, recent increase in birtherism tactics we should call them what they are. It's racism. It's very clearly what they are coming at her with. And you know what? I think in 2020, right now, people see it for what it is. And I have great confidence that Kamala Harris will navigate this well and will be sworn in as our next vice president come January.
Governor Gretchen Whitmer, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Coming up next on Yahoo Finance's DNC 2020 election special, we talked to Yahoo News editor-in-chief Dan Kleidman about Joe Biden's path to the presidency. That's next.
Mitch Breinig, owner of Mystic Valley Dairy in Wisconsin. Mitch, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it. I guess first off, if we can just start by telling the viewers what you do and telling us a little bit about your farm.
So I have a family dairy farm in Sauk City, Wisconsin. We currently milk about 400 cows and have about 1,000 acres of cropland.
And I know that the pandemic has really hit the economy hard, and dairy farmers are no exception. What have the past few months been like for you? What have you been dealing with, and maybe kind of the dairy industry as a whole in Wisconsin?
Particularly on my farm, it's been quite a wild ride. We started in April when things started to change quite a bit, and my milk processor contacted us and said that we had to cut back our milk production 20% starting in 2 days. And so basically on my farm, that was about 200,000 pounds of milk in a month that we had to cut back. And so we actually sold some cows to some other farmers. And then we actually, in the end, had to dump some milk out. And that was pretty frustrating. It's the first time in my lifetime I've been farming for 150, and in my lifetime, I don't ever remember having to do that.
Your industry has gone through a lot over the past few years when it comes to trade and just the other issues that we've seen over the past few years. Can you talk about trade in particular? I know it's been pretty rocky. Do you feel like that was worth it to get to USMCA and get to the China trade deal? Because how has that impacted your business?
So, besides being a dairy farmer, I'm also a corn farmer and a soybean farmer. And, I think it's really disrupted those markets. Obviously there's been some trade payments that have been made to farmers, but I don't think they've really offset the drop in the price and the change in demand that we've had for those products. And, on my particular farm, we also sell embryos to China. We were doing that before the trade deal started, and that deal stopped because they started to raise the tariff on that. And so we went from selling like 100 a year to 0 overnight.
How much does that play into your decision on who you're going to be voting for in the fall? How much does trade play a piece in that?
I think it's pretty big. And, this trade problem hasn't started, in the last 3 years. It's sort of been a trade problem that we've had for many years, and just seeing how we negotiate, how we make those trade deals is really important. And quite honestly, I was hoping for more to get done. I think we've signed some deals, but we haven't really seen sort of the fruits of those labors. And to me, it's been disappointing. We sort of have the pomp and circumstance that we have this fancy new deal, but the meat and potatoes that are inside the deal are really what's important. And we really haven't seen those come forward yet.
Do you look at Vice President Biden's proposal, some of his ideas for his campaign? Do you feel like anything is encouraging there?
I guess I've said a little bit lately that I just haven't heard him talk about agriculture, and agriculture isn't the only issue that, people vote on. But for me as a farmer, I really want to hear their agriculture proposals, and, I want to hear, what they're going to do for trade, what they're going to do for rural America and internet, getting internet out there, what they're going to do to ensure sustainability and ensure, farmers are going to be able to build these family farms and continue into the next generation. And right now, coming from both sides, it's really sort of hard to see what those proposals are that are going to make a difference in my family's life.
Thank you so much, Mitch Breinig, owner of Mystic Valley Dairy. We really appreciate you making the time for us.
I'm not hearing anything.
Hey, Andy, I'm not hearing you. You're muted, but I'm going to guess you just asked me a question about the poll we just conducted, so I'm going to tell you about it, whether you asked that or not. Yeah, we wanted to figure out what's likely to be voters' mindset when they go to the polls in November, so about 3 months from now. So we asked them a bunch of questions. Do you think this thing that measures quality of life is going to get better or worse over the next 3 months? And out of 10 things we asked about, on all 10, people said they think more people said it's likely to get worse than it is likely to get better. So that's probably bad news for President Trump. So I'll just give you a couple examples here. On the economy, 51% told us it's likely to get worse. Only 30% think it's likely to get better. On job prospects, 40% say it's going to get worse. Only 32% saying it's going to get better. And on the coronavirus, 44% think it's likely to get worse by within the next 3 months, and only 31% think it's likely to get better. So people expect life to get a little tougher in the country, and that is not the mood you want voters to be in if you are an incumbent president running for re-election.
All right, let's go over to Danny Kleiman. Danny, your poll's out today also. What did you find in your results?
Well, not dissimilar to what Rick just said. In the head-to-head number between Biden and Trump is Biden leads by 11 points, 49 to 38. That is the widest margin since we've been polling for more than a year now. And Trump is being hurt by all of these underlying issues, the economy, not as badly on the economy, but it's not certainly not helping him. But really coronavirus. That is, I think, the central issue here. He is doing worse on coronavirus than he has since we began polling on coronavirus in April. 59% of Americans say they do not approve of his handling of the virus. He's not doing well on some recent controversies. The U.S. Postal Service issue is hurting him. More Americans believe that voters will be disenfranchised, or more concerned that voters will be disenfranchised than they are concerned about fraud. And here's the important point. Independent voters and non-leaning independent voters, that is to say, people who are not leaning toward either Joe Biden or Donald Trump, are very unhappy with the way he's handled this Postal Service issue and the issue of potential voter suppression. That does not bode well for him.
Hey, Dan.
Hey, Danny, also, you've known Joe Biden over the years, and I wanted to ask you about your relationship with him.
I have, a lot of reporters have known Joe Biden over the years, partly because of his longevity, and partly because he's a garrulous schmoozer who likes reporters. I first met him when I was covering the Senate Judiciary Committee in the late 80s, the early 90s. He was famously chairman of that committee for a long time, presided over the Bork confirmation hearing at the same time as he was running for president the first time in 1988. But I then got a chance, one of the sort of more interesting trips I've taken with a politician was in 2005, when there was a kind of détente between the United States and Libya. And he invited me along on his trip to Libya to meet with Muammar Gaddafi. And it was just me and a few of his aides on his Gulfstream 5. And that's when I really sort of got the Biden treatment. I think it was about a 4.5-hour dinner, just me and Joe Biden. He is a incredibly compelling guy in person. And it was when I first understood there's a famous book about the 1988 campaign by Richard Ben Kramer called What It Takes. Joe Biden is one of the characters. That was his ill-fated 1988 campaign when he had been accused of plagiarism and had to drop out. Richard Ben Kramer, when he talked about Biden, he talked about the connect. And that was Biden's ability to connect with people. Mostly he was talking about voters. In this case, he was using all of his charm on the one reporter who was on the plane with him. It was really quite something. And you really got a sense of his ability to connect with voters and with really anyone who's around him when he wants to do it. So it was eye-opening.
Hey, Dan, Biden is in a pretty good spot right now. What can he do to blow it?
I'm not sure there's a whole lot Biden can do to blow it. I think it's more likely that it would be exogenous effects outside of his control that could have an impact on Biden. And the reason I say that, Biden is famously known as a gaffe machine. And he's made multiple gaffes during this election campaign, including on, the third rail issue of race. But he seems to be kind of Teflon in that, in the sense that I think people know that about him, and they've kind of accounted for it. It's baked in, and so I'm not sure there are too many things that he could say that would get him in real trouble. I'll tell you one thing that would be problematic is his health. He's 77 years old, and if there is a real question about his health, let's say he were to contract the coronavirus, I think that could be devastating. But beyond that, I really don't think there are too many things that he could do that really would be problematic at this point. I just think he's, I'm not sure he's in the catbird seat right now, but he's in a commanding position right now. You think back to 2016. At this time, when Hillary Clinton was heading into the conventions, she had an average of less than 3%, ahead of Donald Trump. We've got him 11%. There are a lot of polls that have him 9, 10. One last thing on this, which is that people often talk about Michael Dukakis coming out of the Democratic campaign in 1988 with that huge 19 or 20 point margin that just kind of evaporated. This is a different political era. We have sorted ourselves into such highly polarized tribes that those kinds of fluctuations just don't happen anymore. So it's not over. The Democrats and Joe Biden certainly shouldn't consider this a cakewalk, because a lot of things can happen, but I think he's in a pretty good position.
Okay, Dan Kleibman, editor-in-chief of Yahoo News, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up next on Yahoo Finance's DNC 2020 election special, former presidential candidate Julian Castro joins us with his take on the Biden-Harris campaign. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Yahoo Finance's special 2020 election coverage. I want to get straight to our next guest for a conversation on the Biden-Harris ticket and the Democratic Party going forward. I'm joined now by one-time Democratic presidential candidate and former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Julian Castro. So, Secretary, a lot of questions have been asked about the importance of Kamala Harris on the ticket. And I think by now a lot of people understand just how monumental it is for her to be picked as the VP candidate to Joe Biden. But what I'm wondering is your view of her as someone who can excite progressive voters, or do you think that she really just strengthens the more moderate and centrist position of the campaign?
Oh, I think she excites a lot of voters out there of different stripes, whether they're moderate or they're liberal. What I saw on the campaign trail from her is that she's very able to connect with folks, that her story is an American dream story that resonates very well all over the country. She also just represents in a very real way, embodies the fact that the Democratic Party is a party that has put together a beautiful coalition of people from diverse backgrounds, and that stands for an America where all of us have opportunity, not just some people like Donald Trump wants, but everybody. So I think she embodies the spirit of the America that we want. She's prepared. She's exciting a lot of people out there. You can already tell there's been an infusion of energy into the campaign, which is great. You know, now it's just up to all of us to work hard all the way through the finish line in November, because we know that we can't take anything for granted.
So I'm wondering if you see Democratic voters at all as perhaps unenthusiastic about the Biden-Harris ticket, but particularly about Joe Biden. And particularly because I've been seeing on social media right now a settle for Biden Instagram account. There's been a new Pew Research poll that says that 56% of Biden voters say it's just because he's not Donald Trump. Are you seeing Democratic voters as unenthusiastic? And if they are, how do you think that Biden over the next few days at the convention and even going forward to the general can excite more Democratic voters?
I just think there's a difference between, these poll questions that you get that are put to somebody on the phone or online, and how people actually feel out there. People are enthusiastic about going to vote in November, and they've chosen Joe Biden for a reason, because what Americans want is they want somebody who's a steady hand. They want somebody who has the wisdom, the experience to lead this country well again in a time of a global pandemic when we absolutely need great, effective leadership. And that's Joe Biden and that's Kamala Harris. So I don't see any enthusiasm gap there. In fact, poll after poll shows that Joe Biden is leading by 9, 10, 11, 12 points. So I think that, it looks good, again, as long as there's effective outreach, registration, and turnout, because just mechanically, this is going to be the weirdest election that we've probably ever seen because of the limitations that the coronavirus has put on the exercise of the franchise. More campaign efforts are going to have to be digital and telephonic. More of the voting is going to be done ahead of time by mail and other forms of early voting. It's going to be unusual. And that means that even more so now, we can't drop the ball. We have to keep pushing. And that's why this convention is so important, to fire up the troops and get everybody energized. And I think it's going to deliver this week.
So, Secretary, as you mentioned, this is a very weird time right now, and we're seeing a lot of folks talk about the economy, particularly because of the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. However, most folks still prefer President Trump on the economy to Joe Biden. Is there anything that Democrats should be hitting on in particular, essentially to make voters, but also Wall Street, believe that the economy is in good hands going forward with the Democrats?
I think they trust Joe Biden. They know Joe Biden. The Obama-Biden administration has the best track record in terms of getting this country out of a deep recession. When Barack Obama and Joe Biden took over in early 2009, we were losing 700,000 jobs every month. And then after a couple of months, we went on this streak of about 70 months, more than 70 months of positive job growth, the longest streak of positive economic job growth in our country's history. What that says to me is that Joe Biden knows a thing or two about building back and making sure that people get back to work and that our economy is strong again. Unfortunately, he's going to have to do that, after the mess that Donald Trump has helped create, just like Barack Obama had to bring America back after the economic recession, the crisis that came right before him. But I think that, I know that Joe Biden is up to it because he's actually shown that he can do it.
All right. Well, we will have to leave that there. Secretary Julian Castro, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Kristen Myers, thank you very much. Let's turn to the panel for some final thoughts. Jessica Smith, this is going to be a one-of-a-kind convention. What are you going to be looking for, and how is a remote convention going to make the whole thing different this time around?
Yeah, this is going to be something we have never seen before. Everything is virtual. And I think maybe that's going to force parties to think a little outside of the box going forward. Traditionally, conventions have not been filled with much drama, not many surprises. Everything has been, honestly, sometimes it gets a little boring. So maybe the parties are going to look at this as a chance to reevaluate, to do something different in 2024. So tonight, we'll see how things go. That's virtually. We'll see if they run into any issues or not. But I think it will be interesting to see how this plays out over the next few years to see if they kind of spice things up.
A few years. Okay, Rick Newman, what's going to be something you're looking for this week?
I think both of these conventions are going to be anticlimactic. I don't think they're going to move the needle for a couple of reasons. One is the strange format, obviously. But given how partisan things are these days, there just are not that many undecided voters who are going to tune into a convention and say, oh, I like that guy. He seems pretty good. The way it happened for Bill Clinton back in '92. I think the debates are going to be more important. President Trump has basically established a senility test for Joe Biden by saying he's senile and he's cognitively impaired. If Joe Biden can prove that he's cognitively with it in debates, I think that's great for Biden. And last thing I'll say is the most interesting thing I heard in the last hour was the farmer in Wisconsin Jess interviewed, who said, I was ready for him to say, yeah, I'm sick of Trump's policies. They've hurt me more than helped, and I'm ready to go for Biden. That's not what he said. He said, I haven't really heard about Joe Biden's policies toward agriculture. And that tells me Biden does need to be communicating directly to voters in the 6 swing states. I'm not sure he's going to reach them if he just keeps doing his broadcast from Wilmington, Delaware. But we've heard people say, don't look for him to be on the campaign trail. So I don't think Biden has this locked at all.
All right, Kristen, you just heard Rick saying it's not a lock for Biden by any means. And he also thinks this could be anticlimactic. What's your take?
Yeah, absolutely. And what Rick is pointing at about some of the vagueness coming out of the Biden campaign on certain issues is actually what I'm going to be looking for this weekend in the run up to the general election. You know, frankly, we do have a lot of voters that say, listen, I'm voting for Biden because he's not President Trump. And that's not exactly the type of enthusiastic voter base that you want, especially going against Donald Trump, whose supporters are emphatically and enthusiastically supportive of the president. So I'm going to be interested to hear how he can entice some of those more progressive voters who think that he's far too moderate, far too centrist, and also view Kamala Harris, frankly, as a more moderate and centrist pick, given her record, you know, as Attorney General of California, where she stood on criminal justice, where she stood on healthcare. So I'm going to be interested to see how Democrats can really unite the party and create one enthusiastic voter base ahead of the general.
All right, it is going to be an interesting night and an interesting week, an interesting 2 weeks for sure. Kristen Myers, Rick Newman, Jessica Smith, thank you guys so much. You've been watching Yahoo Finance's coverage of the Democratic National Convention. And also make sure to tune in next Monday, August 24th at 5 p.m. Eastern for our special coverage of the Republican National Convention right here on Yahoo Finance.